quorum roll call to see where we are in terms of starting this meeting, and then we will begin. Governor Abel, I happen to know he's in a summary judgment motion right now. Governor Angevel, Governor Clark,
here.
Governor Grabicki,
Here.
Governor Higginson, Governor Kang, Governor Knight,
Here.
Governor McBride,
Here.
Governor Peterson,
Yes.
Governor Shichetti,
Here.
Governor Stevens, Governor Swagel,
Here.
Governor Tollefson, Governor Williams-Ruth.
Here.
Quorum, just. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our second day of our last general meeting of the year of the Washington State Bar Association. I'm Rajiv Majumdar, president of the Washington State Bar Association. To remind everyone, we are on a Zoom meeting. That makes communications more difficult than they often can be. Be patient and try to use good Zoom etiquette, which means if you can, use the electronic hand-raising function. Or wave your arm furiously until I see you. That may or may not happen, but we'll see what happens. And I want to thank everyone for being here when I know normally you might be celebrating Mahaloya, the Bengali Hindu advent of the Durga Puja season, which is the celebration of the feminine divine aspect of the universe, where a woman was created to slay the demons. A goddess was created to slay the demons that no masculine god could. And this is a very important celebration in Bengali culture, and Hindu Bengali culture in particular. And it is to be inspirational throughout the year to help us vanquish demons, which is what we at the Washington State Bar Association should be dedicated to doing. So I look forward to a great day of slaying demons. And with that, it's very appropriate that we start with the prestigious people entrusted with educating the future members of our bar and the future problem solvers of our society. I'd like to welcome the deans of our Washington State Law Schools. We have Annette Clark from Seattle University School of Law, Jacob Rooksby from Gonzaga School of Law, and I see Mario Barnes as well from the University of Washington School of Law. Thank you so much, the three of you, for being here. We do this every year, but I think this is a very special year because the three law schools, well, like everyone, has been dealing with some pretty unique situations, just as we have. Not just coronavirus, but also diploma privilege, the future of your students who are graduating under that manner, and just the general crisis of confidence in the law and the rule of law in our country. And I welcome the three of you. I don't have a planned methodology by which to call on you on, except my own biases. And being a graduate of the Seattle U School of Law, and then being a graduate of the University of Washington Graduate School, but not the School of Law, I guess we're just going to have to roll against my biases and let Gonzaga go first, and then the University of Washington, and then Seattle University.
That seems only fair. Thank you very much. And great to see familiar faces. It's great to see my colleagues, Annette and Mario. And you're right, what a time this has been, and what a time this will continue to be, I think, for legal education. The good news is I think this is only underscoring so much of what's happening in society, the importance of lawyers and the importance of a legal education. We are back in person at Gonzaga University School of Law. So we opened in person in August, and we spent all summer coming up with our back to campus plan. This was obviously a whole university endeavor. And so far, so good. I mean, knock on wood, but we our 1L students in particular are in person. Our upper level courses are taught in hybrid format, depending upon the professor. And of course, if any student has a health reason to not be in person, they are learning remotely, including in the 1L year. So our sections are smaller due to social distancing. So we have at maximum 34 students in a classroom in our 1L year. This was a very good year for us, all things considered, in terms of enrollment numbers. We enrolled 153 students at our law school, and 16 of those were in our executive JD program, which is a 2-year JD program. Our LSAT median was a 153. Our GPA was a 3.4. And the thing that we're most proud of is that this is the most diverse class that we have had ever at our law school. So 27% racial and ethnic minorities in our entering class. So we are investigating many of the things that we have done over the past couple of years to see what worked. And of course, the work doesn't end here, but I think it's a good indication of where we hope to be. And that entering class number for us was also the largest for us in about 10 years. So slaying demons, I like that a lot. I'm gonna use that. I think the thing that is on my mind, and I'd be curious to hear from my colleagues. We worked a lot, obviously, with the state bar and the state Supreme Court over the summer with respect to the bar exam, and I think that that there are still questions about sort of the future of state bar exams, and particularly in Washington State. I know it's on the minds of certain of our now 3L students. So, I just want to signal very much my interest in working collaboratively with the WSBA and with the state Supreme Court in examining the bar exam, because I think we do have an opportunity to be a leader in this new environment, and I think we already are doing that. And so very proud of the efforts and the collaborations among the deans, and certainly our hope to continue along those lines going forward. So I'll stop and happy to answer any questions, but I know we're on an agenda.
Dean Barnes, welcome.
So like Dean Nooksby, thank you for making this time for us. And what is, by all, sort of measures, an unusual and challenging time in our region, in our country. I agree with Dean Nooksby. It is a time that proves that more than ever, we need people committed to justice, equality, and the rule of law. And so I thank you for your work in this space to ensure it in Western Washington. And so we started our faculty convocation yesterday. We actually, as a quarter school, won't come back until next week. I hate starting late, but I always like the company. The other two schools that start this late are Stanford Law School and the University of Chicago. So, which is the thing that doesn't belong? Yeah, University of Chicago, because it's in the Midwest. But anyway, what I said in convocation yesterday is what I'll repeat here. Despite the challenges we've been facing and continue to face in terms of the ongoing human tolls and economic tolls of the pandemic, our continuing national moment of racial reckoning around government-sanctioned police violence, this new spate of national disasters in terms of hurricanes and fires that has us not even able to step outside our homes if we want breathable air, that despite all those things, I said two things yesterday that I will say here, that I think there is really reason for great sort of hope that what comes next will certainly be a better tomorrow. And what I mean by that is the pandemic is ongoing, but it will end. And I actually think this racial reckoning has been long overdue. And maybe the natural disasters that we're facing will force this country to actually deal in earnest with climate change. And so, these crises are more than anything an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for us as lawyers and civic leaders to lead. And I appreciate your partnership and hope that we will be able to advance the ball in significant ways and positive ways against some of this. So we, unlike Gonzaga, are not back in person. Actually, we are substantially online, almost entirely. We are more than 90% online. And if I'm being honest, if it weren't for a department, if it weren't not for a DHA mandate, which suggested that our incoming international students would not be able to receive visas unless we had some online classes, we would be even more remote. So we mostly are offering for our incoming students, and there are just some portions of our clinical programs which require not the entire class, but elements of the class to do in-person meetings and services. But we are largely more than 90% online, and that is not ideal. But I think the lesson of the spring and the winter has taught us how to be more effective online, how to improve our teaching offerings, how to continue to build and maintain community even while we are socially distancing. So my message yesterday, my message to you is I am both hopeful that what is around the corner is better than what we have just left behind, and two, that I think our schools and the WSBA and the institution and legal profession will be critical in helping to get this country back on track and this region and city back on track in so many areas. And so the things I want to also echo, I really appreciate it substantially, the opportunity to work with Dean Clark, Dean Rooksby, the WSBA, and the Supreme Court in solving the conundrum of what we would do about licensing our students as the pandemic raged on and then the protests took over our city. I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude to Dean Clark and the Seattle University Law School for returning us to the question of diploma privilege in earnest in a way that I think was absolutely necessary when you think about what our students were facing. I am absolutely interested, as is Dean Rooksby, in the next steps. I know the Supreme Court has placed Justice Montoya Lewis in charge of putting together the committee that will look at ongoing licensing issues. But I think Jacob has made the point, and I agree, that committee is probably not going to be able to make recommendations that will help us figure out what's going to happen in February. And as you know, the diploma privilege only extended for those who were registered for the July and September bars in the state. So there are questions, but I've enjoyed that work. I've also enjoyed the work on WLI, and I am hoping that we will be able to return the Washington Leadership Institute back to the important work it does in creating new leaders. As you know, in this spring, we made a decision mostly based on the fellows to curb the activities in light of all that was going on. But that is an important partnership, not only for the University of Washington and the bar, but all the deans are really instrumental in ensuring that WLI is a success. So I look forward to that. I want to do a shout out with my little bit of remaining time to say we note that Gene McElroy has retired. And when I say thank you to the WSBA for the partnership, it was really Gene McElroy who was doing a lot of the heavy lifting of organizing us and keeping us informed. And I think the job they did of having to turn from preparing to safely administer 2 exams and then to deal with diploma privilege was hugely admirable. So big shout out to the WSBA, big shout out to Gene for that, because it was a huge service for the profession and certainly our graduates. And so the last thing I will say before turning over to Dean Clark is before the pandemic and before this sort of national crisis around racial justice, our school was already in the midst of revamping its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I am, like Dean Rooksby, really proud of the class that's coming in. Like the class at Gonzaga, it's larger than we either predicted and larger than our norms. We normally are between 150 and 165. We have an incoming class, if they all show up next week, of 175. I'm extremely happy that the numbers in terms of the metrics for LSAT and GPA are higher than our normal numbers or our average numbers over in a typical year. And our diversity numbers are improved over last year. I also need to give a shout out to Dean Clark, because year over year, Seattle University produces the most diverse class of student and we need to honor that, because it's important that we are creating diverse lawyers for diverse society, and we're committed to it. I will use you as a North Star to improve our performance, but I am pleased that it is improving, and we will continue this year We were already having town halls. I created this year a dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've revamped our policy for reporting discrimination in and outside of classrooms, and we will continue on. We are working on right now a statement of anti-racism for the law school that's not just about our commitments and values. I think almost anyone would say they're committed to the values of anti-racism, but it's what actions we are planning to take to further those commitments that I think are important. So I'll stop there and turn over to my friend. And I said it when there were a few people on the call. It is really good to see you, Jacob and Annette. We went from seeing each other almost every week to a whole summer off. So it's good to see you all. Thank you.
Dean Clark, if you'd give me a moment. Thank you for all of that. I usually don't interrupt, but I just love seeing how collegial and collaborative all of our law schools are. And you reminded me of that. You said two things I just wanted to recognize. One, I wanted to thank University of Washington Law School for hosting WSBA funded program, the Washington Leadership Institute, which I am a product of, and which I would not be the president of the WSBA but for that program, the WSBA's investment in me. So thank you, WSBA, for that. But Dean Barnes mentioned our former Chief Regulatory Officer, Jean McElroy. I think her successor is here, Hanada Garcia, who was also instrumental in doing all of that work, and I wanted to recognize her. But Jean McElroy did do a Herculean task on all of that. We recognized her at the last meeting, but I do want to emphasize again all the great work she did. And I'm sorry, Dean Clark, but just take things out of order. A long time WSBA liaison just wanted to tack a note onto that, and so I'm going to recognize Jim McPherson to tack on to Dean Barnes' comments.
Okay, my turn?
Oh, 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Mr. McPherson needs to unmute himself, though. We'll figure that out. We'll go to Dean Barnes and come back. Dean Barnes, Dean Clark, please proceed.
Yeah, okay.
I'm happy to be Dean Barnes for the day. Oh, it looks like Jim is ready.
Well, you caught me off guard there. I got to push several buttons to unmute. But yes, of course, Jean has been a stalwart member of the bar as an attorney, but more particularly as the bar. And so I will join in any accolades to headed Jean's way and sorely miss her as a staunch member of our organization, both as an attorney and as an administrator. So thank you so much to Jean McElroy.
Thank you. And apologies, Dean Clark, and thank you. Please proceed to what I am greatly biased towards, the Seattle University Law School.
Thank you, President Majumdar, and we, of course, are very proud to claim you as our graduate. I share Jacob and Mario's optimism during these difficult times. I think one of the big questions we all faced in legal education was whether law students were going to choose to come to law school during this time. And I'm really glad they've chosen to do so. We desperately and urgently need them. And I'm just going to refer to something that came up at our orientation. We had, as we do every year, Justice Mary Yu speak to our entering students. And we had a great dialogue over Zoom. And one of the students posed a question to her. And that question was whether current students coming to law school now during the pandemic would be looked down upon by the profession because their legal education would be lesser since it would had to be done, at least on this side of the state, virtually. And the student had heard that from a lawyer. And Justice Yu's response was so great. It was so inspiring. What she said was that our students should embrace this opportunity, that they should claim proudly that they are COVID lawyers, that they have the courage, the persistence, the resilience, the tenacity to come to law school during this time. It reflects their passion and their commitment, and that they will gain skills through this process that other lawyers won't have and that will serve them in good stead. And I found that inspiring. And so as I was doing my remarks to our entering class and to our faculty and staff, what I suggested is that we all needed to claim that. We are COVID educators. We are COVID law students and lawyers. And this is what lawyers do. We problem solve. and we work through society's crises. So again, thrilled with our entering class. We've had a steady state of about 200 entering students each year for a while. That's our goal. We too over-enrolled. We brought in 223 wonderful students with a median LSAT of 155 and a median GPA of 3.4. 65% of them are women. That's the highest percentage of women we've had in our history. 40% are students of color, and Dean Barnes, thank you for the shout out. As both deans know, it takes constant work and effort and commitment to not just bring in diverse classes, but to support them, to live inclusion and equity, to make sure that our students as they come in have a sense of belonging within the law school. 17% of our entering class identify as LGBTQ, 5% are veterans, and about 18% of them are part-time students. And they're just a great group. They're passionate. They're learning virtually. Just as Dean Barnes described, we are probably 90+% virtual at this point. Really, the only thing that we're doing in person is some of our experiential learning. So a couple of the clinics and a couple of the simulated courses will have some in-person, of course, socially distanced class time, but otherwise we're virtual. It's a challenge, but I do want to acknowledge the work that the faculty did this summer. So last spring was just wild as we all, virtually overnight pivoted to teaching online. Our faculty really took it to heart this summer that they needed to up their game in terms of best practices for virtual learning. Our university offered a number of modules and courses. We did workshops with our career faculty, our adjunct faculty, to make sure that we could provide a high quality legal education virtually. We too did I don't know how many rounds of scenario planning. And so until July, our plan had been to do what Gonzaga has been able to do, which was to be in a sort of hybrid virtual and in-person environment. And towards the end of July, I really just had so many faculty who were uncomfortable with that we decided we needed to pivot to the fully virtual. That will continue throughout this semester. Our exams will be done remotely. Students are starting to clamor, wondering what spring is going to look like. Spring starts in January. And we don't know for sure yet. We would like to do something that's more hybrid, but we also know that we are going to need to provide access virtually for students, even if we're able to go hybrid and have some in-person components, that we will need to make it possible for students in the spring who need to stay virtual to be able to do that, including students who are international, who will not come to Seattle this year, won't risk that travel. So it will continue to be a challenging and interesting year. It is never dull leading in higher education, and 2020 really has been one for the record books. I want to say again how thankful I am to have been a part of a collaboration with Dean Barnes and Dean Rooksby, with the WSBA and the Washington Supreme Court with regard to diploma privilege. And I know that the Board of Governors was not initially, and perhaps still not, in favor of the diploma privilege. But I will tell you, I think the decision was the right one under these extraordinary circumstances. And I think that has been proven out by watching what's happened nationally. It has been chaotic in other states. And what graduates of law school who were registered for the bar exam have been put through in other states is something that no one wants. And I'm not laying blame on anyone. But I am just thankful to be a dean and an educator in a state where a different decision, a courageous decision was made by our Supreme Court to really listen to the graduates, their stories, their narratives, their concerns, the situation they were facing, and to provide them with a safe and timely path to licensure. It's been a very, very happy time as we've watched graduates get sworn in and begin work and start serving these communities where that's not happening in other states, where graduates are still waiting to be licensed because of problems in administering the bar exam. And I too think we need to learn from this experience to look at closely whether the bar exam we have is what we want, whether we want to do something differently. I've written an article on this. I don't know where I come out yet, but I think it's the right time to explore. There's an opening, and we will learn from having had diploma privilege in this state. So I look forward to the conversations. I had the opportunity to interview Justice Whitener last night, our graduate, as one of our influential voices. And one of the audience members asked about, what's happening with the task force? When is it going to get going? And she did, as all good Supreme Court justices would do. She said, when there's information, we'll let you know. So that was good for me to know, too, that it's coming, but it's not here yet. And of course, it's Justice Montoya Lewis who will be leading that task force. And I know all three law schools look forward to being involved with that endeavor. The final thing I'll say is that when I think about what's the watchword, what's the theme at our law school for this year, it's been made very clear to me, we just are finishing up our 4th week of classes, that watchword will be transparency. We have activist students, and they are pushing me hard. Certainly on diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism. We've done a lot of work in that area already, but they don't care for statements. They want to see action. And they've given me a list. Our Black Law Student Association, our leaders, and our Social Justice Leadership Committee. So I've got a long list of areas that we're working on, and I'll be reporting back to the students next week because they want to know since summer what progress have we made. Really happy to say that Nikita Oliver will be teaching for us this spring, and it'll be a course that looks at the question of defunding police. Should be a fascinating exercise. The other thing that my students are really exercised about is the tuition. We had a tuition increase this year. It was a moderate tuition increase, but in the wake of COVID-19 and the circumstances students are dealing with, I can affirmatively say they are unhappy that tuition went up. I had 2 town halls on Wednesday. I will candidly describe them to you as brutal. And I get to have 2 more again next week because they have more questions that they would like me to answer, which I'm happy to do. They are entitled to know what our budget looks like, where their tuition funds go. And so again, I will spend this year listening to our students and being as transparent as I can about our anti-racism efforts, about our budgetary matters. And so it looks to be a busy year. And it's great to see all of you. Thank you.
Great to have you, Dean Clark. And I'm glad you started with a quote by Justice Yu, which was very motivational and inspirational, because as a result of my going to your law school, I met Justice Yu in 2006 and externed with her office, thanks to Seattle University, when she was a judge in the Superior Court. And having interacted with her more intimately here at the WSBA, I know she's never fails to motivate. We have a number of governors already lined up to ask the governor's questions, but I will recognize one thing Dean Clark said, it very in particular. The nature of student bodies and the people going into law is very rapidly changing. I experienced this firsthand. I gave a guest lecture at the UW Law School earlier this year on ethics, and there was, I guess I would say, a brutally spirited discussion on criminal justice reform. I was surprised, but I can see that it's a tenor of our nation. People are going to law school because they want to make change. Thank you all for being here. I have on my list Governor Knight, Governor Angeville, Governor Swagel, Governor Williams-Ruth. Governor Knight, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you to all three deans for your time to be with the board this morning. We very much appreciate it. I'm glad to hear that it sounds like enrollment is up at all three of our law schools this year, especially Gonzaga. It sounds like the largest class in a decade. My question is this a national trend that you've observed with your colleagues across the country? And if so, what are the reasons? Are there any parallels to the 2008 recession? Is that a factor? Obviously the current pandemic is something that started, around the time of applications or a little bit after, and I'm not sure if how that impacts it. But hopefully, why is enrollment up if it is? Thanks.
Great question. I'll share what little I know, and my colleagues probably know more about this. The data that I heard from our admission staff was that nationally, LSAT takers were down 0.5 point. Regionally, we were up, I think, 2%. Is what I heard. I think if I get the numbers correct. So, and please correct me if I misstated.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's not because we've seen a big uptick in applications nationally. Pacific Northwest has frankly languished behind the rest of the country in recovering. So I think my view is this really is the new normal. Our applications have been relatively flat. At least they're not dropping anymore. So we had a number of years because of the recession where applications were dropping nationally and in the Northwest. As Jacob said, I think we've plateaued and perhaps gone up just a little bit. Honestly, the difference for us in happily over-enrolling, has been a difference in yield. So about the same number of applications, but a higher percentage of students choosing our law school. And that's always a really, really happy thing. And I will, praise my admissions folks, my faculty. The question is, are you offering a legal education with a focus that students are attracted to? And we bring in a lot of students with a very strong emphasis on social justice, public interest. And so, Governor Knight, I would say that the good news is I think the students coming to law school are coming for the right reasons. We see far fewer applicants to law school who are coming because they don't know what else to do. That's probably in part because it is so expensive. But these are really, really committed, aspiring lawyers.
So I'll just add to that 2 bits of information, which is we have some data that suggests, consistent with Dean Clark's point, that these are people who have been considering law school all along, but that COVID gave them an opportunity to make the shift at this time in light of all else that was going on. The interesting part of that I hadn't figured into it at all was the fact that for certainly at the University of Washington, it sounds like at Seattle U, for a number of our students who are coming in this year, at least certainly for the fall, they don't necessarily have to relocate in order to come to school. So some of the greater yield has been about people making the decision to accept the offer, I think, because they also know they can delay their decision on when they actually have to physically relocate, and that gives them greater flexibility. And then there's also, for us, the surprising statistic was not just that the numbers are higher on yield, which they are, but actually our end state and regional numbers are up, which is the part of our yield that's greater than it has been traditionally, is actually from the state of Washington, and in particular, Western Washington, where we've always had fairly strong numbers, but now they're even higher than they've been traditionally.
Wonderful. Governor Angeville?
Good morning, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Also for the spirit of collaboration that is evident between all three of you, and your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In this moment of national reckoning, this conversation has been going on everywhere, including amongst our board members, and it's important. I wanted to ask Dean Rooksby, my recollection of being here last year at the meeting was that the numbers for diversity for Gonzaga were 15%. And I believe, Dean, you mentioned that this year it's 27%. Am I mistaken or in that recollection? Or
That's correct.
That's wonderful. And I wanted to know, to what do you attribute the rise in the numbers? Was it through recruitment?
So great question. And our historical average, going back to 2005, is 13%. So really low numbers. And so, yeah, we saw double that this past year. I could say a lot of different things here, but I think it comes down to some structural changes that we made in terms of, lowering barriers to entry and providing scholarship dollars earlier in the process where they need to be. And I don't know how much inside baseball we want to get into here, but I think some of our approaches to recruitment were outmoded, to be frank. And so we intentionally did some interventions that again broke down some barriers and in many cases provided more money earlier on in the process. And it's no secret that money moves people when we're talking about a legal education that's pricey to begin with. So a lot of that was working against some entrenched norms and ways of thinking and doing and being that were not in and of themselves intentionally racist, but had that effect, I think. And so I'm excited by those efforts to see that they have borne fruit. As I mentioned, this is a continual project, and 1 year good numbers is not, in and of itself cause for celebration. It is part of our strategic plan to be at the 25% mark every year. So, we hope that we're able to continue this next year. I think another piece of it is more of the sort of the news around certain initiatives on the academic programming front. Our Center for Civil and Human Rights has done amazing work. We've offered and opened 2 new clinics as part of that, an immigration law clinic and also the region's first LGBTQ rights clinic. I think the press that those initiatives received, anecdotally, we're hearing from some of our diverse students, meant a lot to them. It signaled an effort at inclusion and an interest in it. I always say the reality now has to match the press. And so, again, we're doing things here to work more consistently in that direction.
So I just want to jump in for Governor Andrew Javelle and say, I didn't give our numbers because my dean said to me, well, technically you can't give them until they all show up on Monday. But if everybody comes on Monday, who claims they're coming, our diversity number will be 34%. For race and ethnicity. For gender, will be 65% women, much like SU, which is tremendous. It'll be 16% for LGBTQ and 6% military. And as a retired naval officer, I have a deep affinity for those folks. So again, you can't hold me to that until Monday when hopefully every single one of them shows up. But that's what those numbers are currently.
That's fantastic. And I just also want to commend you, Dean Clark, for recognizing that having diverse students is important, but also providing that support once they're in the system. And I'm sure all of you at your schools are going to make sure that you have those kinds of mechanisms in place for your students. But thank you.
Governor Swiggle.
Thank you, President Majumdar, and good morning, Dean Clark. Good morning, Dean Barnes, and good morning, Dean Rooksby. It's great to hear the news about enrollment, and it's great to hear that you've been collaborating and that the bar has been collaborating with you. This was a rough summer, not just thinking in terms of academics, but virtually every law firm rolled up the welcome mat, and even government agencies rolled up the welcome mat. And I talk to a lot of students and interact with a lot of new lawyers, and I think we're still in the middle of a bit of an economic and sort of career potential crisis. And I'm just curious if there's more that the bar can do as a statewide organization of attorneys to connect with your students, to mentor them, to create career networking opportunities, or just kind of give career guidance. I think I mentioned the same thing at our meeting last year, and then, just lots of things intervened. But I want to keep throwing that out because I don't know that we have sort of a statewide career mentoring, networking program. And I'm just wondering if there's any value in pursuing those discussions. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and start. And we did talk about this last year. I appreciate, Governor Swagel, that you bring attention to this every year. The networking takes on an even more important priority, I think. We're now doing workshops on how to network virtually. Because students are definitely feeling the obstacle. One of the great messages from Justice Whitener last night, because one of the student questions was, how do we do this? How do we become a part of the profession when we can't be in person? And she just said, don't you dare let that be an obstacle. You need to email, you need to text, you need to be on Instagram, whatever it takes, and to reach out. And I would say the same to the profession, to the lawyers. If you're interested in connecting with law students and helping them connect with the profession, shoot us an email. I mean, we're starting, Monday's our deadline for our first year students to sign up for virtual coffee chats with our alumni. We're starting them in their first month of law school. Doing that. And we're not doing elaborate matching. We are literally just connecting them with an alum who has agreed to spend 20 minutes to a half hour online, each of them with a cup of coffee, hopefully, in there, wherever they are, helping our students see that there's an entire cadre of alumni and professionals out there who know that they're feeling isolated, that they're, not sure how to do this and are willing to engage with them. So, I would love it if the bar would create a program like Utah has that for new lawyers that's more intentional, especially for our diploma privileged lawyers. It would be incredibly useful if we'd had that in place, but I'll just make a plea for it again. I think even in non-COVID times, new lawyers could really benefit from a very intentional onboarding process into the profession that's more than doing CLEs. So I'll stuck there.
Can I interject real quickly? Sorry, Dean Barnes. I agree with everything that Dean Clark just said. I regret I have to sign off at 9:45 because I have back-to-back classes to teach starting then. So I do apologize. I always enjoy this opportunity to speak with you all. But I welcome your questions at any time. So if you have ones for me specifically that you'd like to ask, don't hesitate to email me and we can set up a time to chat by phone. My email address is rooksby, ROOKSBY @gonzaga.edu. It's been great to see everyone.
Good to see you, Jacob. Take care.
Thank you for being here.
So, one part of what hasn't been mentioned already is the difficult summer for our students, and that so many work opportunities from firms to government institutions to other even public interest organizations either rescinded offers or greatly curtailed the work experience and offered it remotely. Even for some of our students who even kept their offers only worked for 3 weeks, which is not a traditional experience. A national conversation among deans around the country has been about a delay in on-campus hiring for this year, where many schools have pushed their on-campus interviewing to January or beyond in light of COVID. And law schools are responding. I know SU, UW, and Gonzaga took a lot of measures to try to help our effective students in terms of both financial support and to give them meaningful work and learning experiences during the summer. But I think what would be helpful is if we could find a way with the bar to partner for two groups. Those who are the new lawyers, who are diploma privileged lawyers who are entering a really uncertain market, and to our current students who are going to graduate into a legal market that in some ways has the same kinds of challenges as the 2008-9 market, with pullback because of uncertainties around the sort of financial health of legal organizations. And I think that what was invited last year is now easier to achieve, which is more ways to have the bar come into our schools and partner with us. Everything is in this fashion now, right? It doesn't involve somebody having to leave their office and drive from downtown in rush hour and be at a location for us in Washington or to travel for Gonzaga. You're in the catbird seat in this one, Annette, because they could just in some ways walk if they really want to SU. But my sense is it's an opportune time as we continue to deal with the fallout from COVID and our decisions around licensing to think about how the WSBA can partner with the law schools to try to start messaging helpful strategies for our students in dealing with what is now an altered reality for the profession.
Before we go on to the next question, I just want to throw in, I want to acknowledge, I think the government agencies did a particularly good job this summer in being willing to take externs virtually. We have a very vibrant externship program for credit. It's one of the ways our students get experience while they're in law school. And we were really worried that those externships would go away. And most of those are with government agencies or nonprofits, public interest work. And the employers pivoted, and most of the externships went forward in a virtual format. Not the same as being in person, but still really, really good experience for the students. So I want to acknowledge the hard work that went into those employers taking on externs virtually.
Okay, we're going to have Governor Williams-Ruth, Past President Pickett, Governor Grabicki, and then Governor Clark. And I'm going to have to cut off questions at that point in order to keep us on schedule today.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You have the floor.
Good morning, Dean Clark and Dean Barnes. I will disclose that I am a proud graduate of Seattle University School of Law. In fact, I like to claim the graduate being the first person to do the entire program in Seattle in the new building, as I graduated in 2.5 years, just so I could get that honor. First, Dean Clark, I want you to tell your students that they have a proud activist governor on this board. Every one of my colleagues knows that this summer, as we've been working through our own diversity, equity, and inclusion training, that I have loved the amazing and artistic words that show support, but that I keep being the one that says, what's next? How do we change? I'm looking to take action in that we are the Board of Governors and that we are the ones that can actually propose things. So I'm glad to hear that that's who are coming in, because that's who I am. That's who I've always been. Second, I will also say that I've been a proud participant in the mentor-mentee program that you had with 1Ls. And I would like to invite the law schools to work with our communications director, Sarah Nagowski, to invite us as the board or individual governors to come back and see what law school is. I mean, again, I was there the day they opened Sullivan Hall, and I can tell you all of the physical transformations that building has gone through. But it's nothing compared to what has happened with legal education. And I will never forget graduating in the dot-com recession. It gets kind of buried now because of the Great Recession and COVID. But it was, again, a challenging time. And I was interviewed by one of the graduates who is about the same amount of time after school that I am now. And he offered me a job for $24,000 a year. And I had to say that won't even cover my loan payments. And so I extend the invitation to you as the deans to help us. I love hearing about diversity and the numbers, because I'll be honest, I don't think there were 17 LGBTQ students in the law school when I was there, let alone out. So the fact that there's now 17% is something that makes my heart swell with pride, considering that there's only less than 1% of our licensed members who openly acknowledge and claim their LGBTQ status. But that, again, it's not the same experience. To hear that civil procedure is now 1 semester, and
breaks my heart.
these are things that I don't know that my colleagues know. And so I will tell you that even if you make the extension, you will have at least one governor. And if we someday, when we get to travel again, I would love to come and actually spend that time. And I wish Dean Rooksby was here to hear me say this, because we're going to be in Spokane again someday. And we're going to have a BOG meeting there, and we're going to be traveling on Wednesday. And I would make myself available to come and see Gonzaga's programs and their clinics. And again, when we're able to come and see your buildings and see your programs and meet with your students and your faculty, because again, as you've all said, these are our future members. The faculty are the ones who are help shaping us. And last thing I'm going to say is, if you have time, I would love for you to stick around for the dialogue regarding the change to civil procedure rules, because that was, as I was reading for today's meeting, the impact on the law education was actually something that I was going to be asking former Governor Bridges about. And I thank you again for your time and the excellent work. And I look forward to learning more about what each of your schools are going to be doing this year.
Thanks, Governor Williams-Ruth. We've talked before over several years about the idea of having the BOG come back to law school. And it's always complicated. It's hard to run your meetings here, at least the in-person meetings. I've talked with Tara about this before. I've talked with Jean Kang about it. But looking at silver linings of being virtual, let me just say, if the Board of Governors wanted to come back to law school, at least, and I think this would be true at Gonzaga, it would surely be true at UW and Seattle U, and you're willing to come into a class and just observe and hang out virtually, that is eminently doable at this point. All you need is a Zoom link and permission from faculty. So if you are interested in that endeavor, we would be happy to collaborate with you. And I think it would be easier during this time to do it. So
I concur, but I want to say, even with regard to sort of physically being present, we each take turns hosting hosting the state Supreme Court. We had our term this past spring. It was 2.5 days of events that the court held its session there. And it's an event for us, and it's amazing for our students. And I think the bar would be much less intrusive in terms of being hosted. So all I'm saying is, if we can host the state Supreme Court and have a set of events that command our students' attention, we certainly could do the same with the bar. What I want is our students to see the role the bar plays in guiding them as young professionals, and the sooner we can make that connection and doing it in law school in a meaningful way would be really helpful. So I agree with Dean Clark that we can make the virtual portion of this work now, as if this is really easy, as long as we have permission from the individual faculty. But I don't want us to give up on thinking about it's still important when it's available to us to actually bring the representation of the Board of Governors into our schools.
Thank you. My exciting list. Let's see, flip through. Past President Pickett, then we have Governor Grabicki and Governor Clark.
Hi, Deans. Hey, this is the 5th time that I've met with the Deans. It'll be the last time. And I got to first apologize to you, because I have certainly underappreciated the significance of the role you play in shaping the legal profession. And that has become abundantly clear to me, not because of all the series of meetings we've had, but because now I have a 1L in my life. And so one of the things I see is that it's like, from the lawyer perspective, by the time people become lawyers, it's, and I want to speak specific to the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. This is kind of where this is going. From the lawyer piece, it's hard to deal with the issues surrounding that, because lawyers, and I can tell you after 5 years of being on the board, really kind of know everything, at least in our minds. We think we know it all. You, however, have this unbelievable opportunity with these young and some not so young, but folks in this huge moment of change where, at least I know from my son, he's gone from knowing everything after undergrad to he knows nothing now. And that it seems to present this incredible opportunity to actually teach people not just the head knowledge of diversity, equity, inclusion, but the heart knowledge as well, because people are open to learning and connecting with one another. So I say all that as background and in sincere appreciation for where you're at and for what you're doing, because I believe if we're going to truly, deeply have meaningful impact in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it actually isn't going to be the lawyers who are lawyers at the tip of that spear, although they're important, but I believe it's you. And it's the people that come into your law school. So all that frame up to say, you've got, clearly it seems like a lot of obstacles in your path with this remote scenario that we're in to connect people. And you have this amazing opportunity with some of the most diverse classes coming on board. What are you doing specifically, if you can identify, and I think you've said some of it, to try and not just give people the head knowledge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to figure out a way to stitch the hearts of those diverse people together, so that, because that to me is where real change happens, is those Kairos moments, if you will, where people say, aha, I get it. This is how we're going to move forward. And you have this unbelievable position as deans. And again, I have underappreciated that until now, living that out and seeing it in real time. So thoughts on that in terms of specifically stitching hearts together in these communities to really make impact?
So I'll say three things. One, we've been in an ongoing process of dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion that started with 3 town halls in the winter and spring, in which I had to sit and take tough medicine, largely from students of color, about the alienating experience of being at UW. And it wasn't that there was anybody manifesting intentional discrimination against them. It was all the ways in which structural and sort of systemic barriers were teaching them that they didn't belong. And as an African-American man who, 25 years ago confronted similar experiences, it was tough to hear my students tell me that. But to your point, we had to get off our high horse and stop talking about our values and ask what we can do as an action plan that starts moving into the areas in which students care about, that is meaningful for what it does to help them feel included, including doing things that the faculty was not necessarily all that embracing of, in terms of questions of mandatory bias training, ways of curricularly integrating the experience of people of color into the first year and beyond. And so that is ongoing, and is part of why we didn't have, and I appointed a dean of a diversity, equity, and inclusion to spearhead these programs. But 2 things that are coming up for this.
Hi, this is Carla Higginson. I'm an attorney.
Governor Higgins. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so 2 things for the fall very quickly. One, we do orientation next week, and to start trying to get to this point of the heart, not just the head or the formal, we assigned our incoming students the common book, Ichoma Alua, the Seattle author, So You Want to Talk About Race, along with an op-ed by John Lewis, our recently departed congressman, and what it was like to be an individual trying to create change for civil rights, and a really short article on cultural trauma and how significant events of racial violence create a collective trauma. And the idea is to start, even in their first week, with a moderated discussion that shows the real problem is not just what we're learning. It's about who we are and how we feel about that locality, and how, as people in a community, we know how to be allies and empathetic and show up for each other, even when one person's reality is not my own reality or experience, as a way of starting a dialogue that we continue, not as a one-off. Here is your diversity training. You've had it now in orientation. It is done. No, as a way of starting a conversation that we will carry forward and be matched up to, like I said, a diversity and inclusion action plan, where we try to show the ways in which we are critically interrogating our own community and asking if we can do better. And on the missing human connection, one of the things we had to do when we realized we're going to be 90% online and not have people get that experience of being in and around a tree. We created something called pods. We're so silly. We're Huskies. We should have created packs, but we created pods. I don't know what so our class of 175 is divided up into 9 pods, which are headed by a faculty member who is known for being not just an excellent teacher, but understands the social, emotional, humanistic side of being a student, where we are creating the social, cultural, co-curricular component to the classroom so that our students can be brought together in their pods, not for a class on civil procedure or property, but to talk about the experience of what it means to be a law student in the time of COVID and what they need from each other and the school to do better. I'll stop because I know we're short on time and I want Dean Clark to have it. But I think the answer is we're trying to be responsive. We'll see how we do.
Right on.
Oh gosh, so much to say here. I too have participated in town halls that have been really tough, where the students talk about that they don't feel a sense of belonging, they don't feel sufficiently cared for or heard, that we do not understand the lives that they're living, particularly our BIPOC students or persons of color. So we're trying again to do a lot in the action realm. I think so much of teaching and educating, Governor Pickett is modeling for our students how we want them to be in the world. And so one of the things we do is bring in the best role models we can find. And so there's a reason why Justice Hughes starts off our orientation. There's a reason why our first Influential Voices program last night was Justice Whitener. Next month's Influential Voices program will be Professor Bob Chang, who leads our Korematsu Center. All of their work is around racial equity and opportunities for students to be involved in that. Judge Galvan did our microaggression training as part of orientation. So just think about who we are exposing our students to. We launched 3 years ago a voluntary racial justice book group program that operates in the spring, combined small groups of faculty, staff, and students, where we recommend books for them to read, but the group can choose whatever book they want. And it cuts across those usual boundaries where faculty are sitting in small groups with student leaders talking about the books that they've read. Ibram X. Kendi is coming through to Seattle as part of Seattle Arts and Lectures. We've purchased 150 virtual tickets for that lecture that we will distribute, preference to students, but also to faculty and staff to be able to hear from him as a community. My curriculum committee is adding a new learning outcome for our faculty to consider that will help us structure our curriculum to make sure that we're going beyond cultural competence, really exposing our students in our curriculum to the history of racism in this country, the ways in which the justice system have been complicit, and the work that needs to be done. Our university is working on a bias incident response plan. We desperately need one, but that will be centralized within the university. I'm working with our Black Law Student Association to develop some better pipelines to Black students than we've had in the past. And we're studying our scholarship, our scholarship program. We give out scholarships to entering students, and there's concern that we're not doing well enough by our diverse students. So when Dean Rooksby talked about the difference that Gonzaga has been able to make in bringing in diverse students and the fact that it took more scholarship money, we're looking at that and re-examining our scholarship policies to see what we can do differently and better to remove those obstacles into law school. I could keep going a long time. Those are some of the efforts. And again, I agree with Dean Barnes. I can say all of those things. The students will be holding me accountable to make sure those things actually happen.
Look, thank you. I wanted to say really briefly, please also relay to Jacob, the three of you are inspirational for the profession. And I applaud what you do with these students, and it is so important. So thank you very much. The other thing I want to say, Annette, is that I know there was some divisiveness over this diploma privilege scenario. My thinking on that, just so you know, was only this. where the hell was this when I was about to set for the bar? I think it's fantastic. I think it's out of the box. I think it is a way to enhance the profession. I don't have negative thoughts for it. Others may feel differently, but again, I applaud all of you and I say thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Grabicki, do you still have a question?
I may. Rajiv, I had to step away for a couple of minutes, so if this question has already been addressed, just stop me. I'd like to hear from each of the three deans briefly where they think we ought to go with the bar exam once we're through COVID. You've all suggested that the current bar exam approach may not be the best, and I'd like to hear what your thinking on it is.
I think that, I had said earlier, I'm not sure, Governor Grabicki, where I'm going to come out on this. It's one of the things that's so exciting to me about the fact that a task force is going to be put together, because I think that there's study that needs to be done. I would like us to look at diploma privilege. We do have this great example of Wisconsin that's been doing it for a number of years. So there's a lot that we can learn there. So I would like us to look at diploma privilege as a possibility. I would like us to look at what's happening with our current exam, who's failing. There's no question that graduates of color fail at a higher rate. We need to get to the bottom of that. And they fail at a rate that you would not expect based on their class rank, their GPA. So there is something very concerning that's happening there. Even putting that aside, there have been questions for years about whether the bar exam is testing for what lawyers need. Is it testing what we've tried to teach them? And I think there are real issues with regard to that. We know that what graduates do in that 2.5 days bears little relation to the practice of law. And so it is both, in my view, over-inclusive and under-inclusive. I am not convinced that everyone who passes that thing is ready to practice law, and I am certainly not convinced that everyone who fails isn't. And as a profession, we have to own that, right? It is such a huge barrier to licensure. And so if we are going to have that barrier in place, we have an obligation to make sure that it is a valid measure of who should be licensed and who shouldn't be licensed. And I think it's very hard to say at this point that we're convinced that it is. So for me, more than anything, I want to be a part of the study and really exploring whether we could do better. And I don't know where I'm going to end up.
I completely agree with everything Dean Clark just said. We know that Justice Montoya Lewis is going to lead the task force. I spoke with her last week and understand that they are in the process of drafting the charge, is at least where they were. Three things incredibly quickly. One, if we look at the history of the bar exam, we should at least acknowledge the fact that the bar exam was not created to ensure the professional proficiency of lawyers. It was actually created as a way to limit who could practice, and there was significant racial discriminatory sort of motivations behind it. So one, let's tell the truth about why we have a bar exam and not hold it out as something that should be treated as sacrosanct. Second, I completely agree with Dean Clark that we have disproportionate negative impacts of the bar, and we need to figure out, in response to that, what is the purpose of the bar? What should we be testing? What is actually representative of what a lawyer needs to know in order to be competent to practice? I think you can have a bar exam, but it needs to be data-driven and evidence-based in terms of what's on it and how it's used. And I do think we should be open to considering other possibilities other than an exam. The toughest email I responded to this week was from a student who got a 268 on the February bar, which on the UBE, which did not qualify them to practice. But if they had gotten that score on July or September, could practice. And so there is an arbitrariness in this that we need to address. And I hope the task force will help us address these issues. But I do think as a profession, we need to be honest about the history and the disproportionate current negative impact.
Thank you. Governor Clark via Governor Hicketti.
Thank you, President Majumdar. I'm Kyle Hicketti. I'm governor from Southwest Washington, but I'm also the president-elect and soon-to-be president this afternoon, absent some disaster.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And while I did not attend any of the law schools in Washington and don't have a bias, I like past President Pickett, fled the state for law school. I did grow up in Spokane and was a prosecutor and used to study at the old elementary school Gonzaga campus before they got the new building. And I was actually admitted to UPS, but ended up, like I said, going elsewhere. UW didn't want me, but I didn't go there. I have a question from Governor Clark, and I'm going to read this. What, if anything, are each of the law school deans doing to address what seems to be ever-growing and massive student loan debt for law school graduates that they face after graduation? It seems that graduates are so saddled with student loan debt that the vast majority find very difficult to be able to provide pro bono, low bono, and moderate means legal services after graduation, hurt access to justice, and serving the public. This large student loan debt also causes many graduates to be unwilling and or unable financially to practice in rural areas in our state that pay less than higher density urban areas, which also hurts access to justice. So what efforts, if any, are being done to address this by each law school? And then after you answer the question, I have just one last little statement that I'd like to make. So I'll turn it over to you.
So this is one of the things that keeps me awake at night. I'm from a poor and working class family. And I went to the University of California at Berkeley for $600 a semester for undergrad and $2,400 a semester for law school. I still couldn't afford it if the United States Navy didn't give me a scholarship. But the truth is, the great, certainly in my mind, public research university needs to be accessible because we know that education is one of the things that changes lives and the trajectory of sort of socioeconomic disparity. And so I lie awake on the fact that public legal education is just like the rent in New York. It's too damn high. It is just too expensive. And we are still at the low end of the market. And while I struggle always to be innovative and to be thoughtful about solutions, I only know 3 ways we can tackle this problem, and one of them is very difficult. One is to keep tuition as low as possible, but our most expensive item at law schools is people. And if we want people to have a living and human wage, the thing that most drives tuition increases at most places is the cost of human capital. So it's hard to say we'll have flat tuition if you don't want to give people cost of living raises and other things. There are only 2 other ways we can offset. One is scholarship dollars. And we fight hard every year to create scholarship dollars. This year, in light of COVID, we created something called a Justice Scholarship to increase diversity and access for applicants of color. And I was so happy that the community responded and gave us money to additional scholarship dollars. But we need that every year. And we need more of it if we want to ensure access to legal education, and we want to ensure that we're not allowing for increasingly sort of manageable debt loads for our students. So, but one of the problems for law schools, and this is a UW, Seattle, and Gonzaga problem, that so much of our scholarship aid goes for merit rather than need or service-based scholarship, mostly because I think in some ways we get so heavily judged from the outside by the metrics of our student body, and the whole rankings that people use for law school, U.S. News in particular, is a driver of that. I would just burn those things down and make more aid need-based and service-based, but there's no incentive for the most highly ranked schools to divest. So we're in that game. The final thing, and I do think there's some hope there, is we need to just develop better programs for loan forgiveness, which are programs that basically either decrease or at least defer loan-based payments for students doing public interest and social justice service-oriented work. We have some, but not enough. I'll stop there to make sure Dean Clark has time to speak.
I think Dean Barnes has covered it pretty well. It keeps me awake at night at 2. I've been in this business. I think this is my 10th year of deaning if I tack the various deanships together. I haven't solved it. The fixed costs that we face in our higher education generally, legal education certainly at my law school, are just so difficult to deal with. There's nothing I can do about debt service. Faculty are very expensive and they're tenured, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be tenured, but as we are a smaller student body, it's taken a long time to downsize the faculty to match the smaller student body, because I've just had to do it as they retire, not filling their positions. We're working to bring the real cost of legal education down. I actually think we've done that, but the reality is that students don't see it uniformly because of the scholarshiping process that we find ourselves engaging in because of U.S. News. And that means you give higher scholarship awards to students who help you on the LSAT domain and the GPA domain. The U.S. News does not measure diversity. They do not factor that into the algorithm. And so as we work hard to diversify our class, I will tell you it harms rankings, which is a terrible, terrible thing. So what you'll find is in private schools, particularly, some students paying full freight and some students paying virtually nothing at all. And it's this huge continuum. And so there are graduates that graduate with this huge debt load. The numbers you see out there are an average, and the actual student experience is anywhere along that continuum. And we know that it's tragic. And I agree with Dean Barnes. All of my fundraising efforts are on the scholarship side. I've got a beautiful building. I don't need anything else in that regard. I need scholarship money for students to help defray what they're facing, and then knowing that they're carrying practically a mortgage when they graduate. And loan forgiveness. We do have our own loan forgiveness program. It's not nearly large enough. It doesn't help nearly enough people. And so I don't have a solution. I know I'm part of a system that in that regard is just hard to defend.
Thank you. Thank you. And just a couple comments. Earlier, Dean Clark mentioned the internships with the government, and my firm, Miller Nash, Graham and Dunn, actually went through with our internships and had entirely virtual interns. They never came into the office at all. We worked through them with the Westlaw and everything. It worked seamlessly, and we were glad to have them. And more firms can do that. They can see that that works. And then finally, Dean Barnes, your invitation to work with the Bar Association, well taken by me, and especially in this virtual world we're living in. So if there's anything that I can do over the next year to participate in those virtual organizations, programs, and in any way that you see that might benefit the students, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll send you my email address.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Deans. Thank you to Dean Rooksby, I believe, earlier as well. We really appreciate you being here. This is actually very enlightening. This is a year where this is all flowing in our heads, and I hope the governor-elect hearing this will maybe bring some new ideas to the table, and we'll be talking to you more throughout this year, and hopefully we'll get back to those physical meetings where we might be able to come and show the students how the regulation of the practice of law works to their entertainment or disappointment or enjoyment.
And President Majumdar, one last thing. We wanted to thank the deans so much for their videos a couple months ago when we posted. That was a lot of fun, and we'll have to think about something to do in the future, but we wanted to thank you for that.
I just want to say how much I appreciate being asked to come and speak with you all. Again, we're fortunate to be in the state of Washington where the profession is collaborative, where we work together, and it's always a pleasure. So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.